welcome and thanks for coming. I know this was short notice, and the reason it was short notice is because it was a timely thing that came up in the news. The reason for this talk was triggered by the controversy in the media between the Pope and the President. And when these things kind of happen, it stirs up a lot of confusion and concern, and I wanted to address it. I want to address some people who are not here tonight, too, as part of this talk. I have a friend I went to school with at Notre Dame who sent me a statement of a prominent commentator, who basically said that they were done with the Catholic Church because of this controversy having to do with Pope Leo and President Trump. And I want to make this talk as an effort to appeal to my friends to take another look at the Catholic Church and her wisdom. Wisdom, I've given my life to. I've spent 40 years as a religion teacher. Okay, I have a title in this church called Director of Faith Formation, which means I oversee the sacramental preparation for the parishioners. Of course, I ended up doing a lot of things that a lay person does to help out in a church when they're full-time. I'm currently transitioning into retirement. I'm now part-time, but I replaced myself part-time. So, and I consider it a real serious matter to teach what the church teaches and to be at peace with that, okay? And there's a lot of controversy now swirling around the teaching of the church, and I hope that this effort tonight will help you come to peace. Starting with peace in yourself about the teaching of the church. Very important to realize that the church teaches something, and we're going to get to this in detail later, but I had an experience of discussing Pope Leo with some of my relatives at a family event. And my relatives have very distinct views from my own. But I thank God that in my family we can share distinct views without ending up in mutual hatred, okay? Because in the society right now, there's a lot of clashing of views that ends up in something that looks a lot like mutual hatred. This is the Pope, one of his talks. There. And there's a lot of fear in the culture right now. Fear to even talk about this topic. I don't want anyone to be afraid tonight. I want to also make it clear that I can talk about the structure, the framework of church teaching, but I do not know enough about any of the topics of geopolitics or history or foreign policy to make definitive declarations about it. Okay? So we want to approach this with what we know, and we want to acknowledge what we don't know. I think that's a good start to any dialogue. What I know and what I don't know. And you'll notice the papal teaching keeps falling down. Take that. We keep falling down as we try to articulate better and better the truth. So we begin tonight in gratitude for a group of people. I see out here a number of veterans who have served our country. And I especially want to remember one of my friends who just died. His name was Cyril or Bud Rose. He was a veteran during the Cold War in Germany. And he was in the very forward of the line in Germany with his wife and his first son. And we found out as we mourned for Bud that they had an escape plan if the Russians crossed the line where he lived in Germany. Bud and all the people that were in his division, their job was to stand there and get mowed down by the Russians to give the people behind them time to come up to the line. So they were sitting ducks, and they knew it. So he had an escape plan for his wife and his son. They never needed to use it because the Russians did, or the Soviets, I should say. The Soviet Union didn't cross the line, so, so he survived his service, and settled back here in South Bend. He's a friend of mine, a friend with the family. So I remember him tonight, and all in gratitude to all the veterans who have this very solemn and sacred vocation of defending peace. Many of you have told me how concerned you are about some of your loved ones who are in service right now. And you're worried about their deployment. And of course, when they deploy right now, they don't know where they're going, that kind of thing. And we want to lift them up tonight in prayer. So I begin by praying the prayer, the St Bavo prayer. Lord God, you reached the heart of St Bavo through the preaching of the gospel. His personal conversion drew him ever closer to you. He renounced a life of sin and devoted his life to prayer, penance, and the proclamation of your good news. Through the intercession of St Bavo, under whose patronage we gather, may we wholeheartedly journey into the mystery of your love for us. By his example and prayers, may we be inspired to open our hearts to the gospel of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
St Bavo,
Pray
for us. Thank you. So I begin with this reflection that I wrote that ended up on my Facebook. So if you read my Facebook, forgive me for having you hear it again. But this was what triggered the talk tonight. It begins. What can be said in a violent time when words are not heard and most compound the wrong? That's a quote I saw on social media. Let me repeat it because it's kind of crucial to what I was talking about before. What can be said in a violent time, when words are not heard and most compound the wrong. Gosh, you must be willing to speak, because right now so many are afraid to. With these words, my friend, the peasant of Notre Dame, that's a real person, by the way. People think that I made this person up, but he's a real person. With these words of the peasant of Notre Dame, I decided to be willing to address the issue of peace. Yet, what I encountered in discussions with some of my dearest family members was the fact that their approach to these matters had already been highly polarized to one side or the other. There was not a lot of room to find a path of mutual truth. I thank God, as I said before, that in my family we can at least have these kinds of discussions without breaking up in mutual hatred. Yet the challenge of finding common ground remains. The effort to communicate without our communication turning into weaponized or tribalized speech is the challenge of these dark times. I sought help from the peasant of Notre Dame, and once again, he surprised me with a quote from, of all people, Nikos Kazantzakis. You know who he is? The author of Zorba the Greek. Okay? One of the famous Greek writers. I guess the most famous Greek writer of the 20th century. Because he didn't just write that one, but he was well known as a Greek man of letters or writing. And here's what he quoted. He quoted Nikos Kazantzakis as saying, "Marriage is a catastrophe." Well, sometimes this wise man, the peasant of Notre Dame, would address me in words with deeper than surface meaning, as he had the calling to be the poor man whose wisdom was destined to save the city, even though he would be forgotten. That's in Ecclesiastes 9:15. As I pondered the meaning of his saying, I was reminded of two priests I knew who connected the catastrophes of marriage with the journey of life. Who were those two priests? Any guesses? We'll get there. Father Barry England was my pastor and my boss at St Bavo for 15 years. One difficult day, I walked into his office. I've counseled 3 couples this year who filed for divorce, and only one of the 3 has reconciled. He responded, "Gus, you must not give up. You must continue trying to help people. In the major leagues, that's a 300 hitter." The other priest I'm reminded of is Father Hesper, Ted Hesper, who said that the international negotiations between countries can be a lot like counseling troubled families. Many times, troubled marriages and families can only be turned around when God's powerful love enters into the situation and changes hearts. Similarly, international crises can often only be resolved by the miraculous power of God opening a way where no way could be found. As I continued my reflections with the peasant, I reflected how catastrophes get turned around by the power of God. We thought of J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, and his idea of the catastrophe. Okay, so instead of the catastrophe, he put places of EU at the front of that word, and he talks about the catastrophe. What the heck is the catastrophe? In order for us to connect properly with the Christian story, that's a story with a capital S, the story, right? the greatest story ever told, we often say, right? We should see the birth of Christ as the eucatastrophe of man's history. And we should see the resurrection as the eucatastrophe of the Christian story of the incarnation. That's what Tolkien said. Okay? That's Tolkien's insight. The story that is the story with a capital S, the greatest story ever told. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my hope and glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love, as our Protestant brothers and sisters sing sometimes. We can sing it too. It means the same to all of us. The story with a capital S begins and ends with joy. This is important. Joy. Because to reject it, according to Tolkien, to reject that story, it leads either to sadness or wrath. Okay? Either sadness, sorrow, or anger, you could say. Wrath, anger. That's what he means. So, if you remove the Christian story, you end up with sadness or wrath. Now I realize the wisdom of the peasant. My friends and family members who could not make any headway in their conversations could really only focus on the catastrophe without factoring in the eucatastrophe. See? Thus their dialogue was fraught with sadness and wrath. Even good people who love each other are plagued by frameworks that cultivate sadness and wrath. So you could be really good Christians and still come up with sadness and wrath because you're subject to a foreign framework that doesn't fit in with the good news of joy, of great joy. That happens all the time, even to good people. We desperately need a different kind of accounting. I mean, accounting, well, it can mean both things. It can mean literally how we account for money. That's full of sadness and wrath. Right now, when I drove here and looked at the price of gas, I was horrified myself. I mean, I didn't prepare for this. I mean, it's going to change my budget, personally. So I can accounting, we've got to shift our accounting, but it's also the way we account for our stories. See? The way we account our stories produces sadness and wrath too. See? Does that make sense? Okay. The peasant continued, if we can learn joy from Tolkien's account of the eucatastrophe, we can learn hope. Hope, this is important, from Merton's account of hope in the face of the unspeakable. Well, what in the world is that? The unspeakable. This is like, Merton really dives deep in this moment here in his thinking. And you got to be patient with both me and Merton as I try to explain the unexplainable, the unspeakable. Like, how do you speak of the unspeakable, right? It seems almost a contradiction, right? So patiently walk through this with me. Merton writes, the unspeakable, what is this? Surely an eschatological image. What does eschatological mean? Having to do with the last things, okay? The end times. So Merton gives us one hint of what the unspeakable is. It has to do with our end. Okay? What is this? Surely an eschatological image. It is the void we encounter. Now get this, the void. This, the void, like the vortex sucking us in. Nothingness. It's sort of the void, okay? I mean, that's how I think about the word void. But again, this is difficult language. Difficult for me. But it's very important. It's very important that Merton came up with this because it fits into our struggle as human beings. That's why it's important. It's the void we encounter underlying, get this, the announced programs, the good intentions, the unexampled and universal aspirations for the best of all possible worlds. This reminds me of that story that was written, I think, by Voltaire, where the guy gets up every morning and he says, every day, in every way, things are getting better and better. He's looking out his window and, disasters are happening. And this was like, but he just keeps saying that. Well, I think that's part of what Merton's getting at here. The void, when people just keep talking in the face of the unspeakable, and there's a big disconnect between the words and what's really going on. I think that's what Merton's getting at there. That's the void in the face of the unspeakable. And he goes on. This is, oh boy, now he's going to get political. Merton, he kind of sneaks the political problem in under the spiritual categories. And he's very good at this. He's not trying to do politics, but he's addressing people who have to deal with the world. And he was very good at that. He had a prophetic calling to do that, I think. And yet his style was not systematic. It was the musings, as the peasant once told me, the musings of a monk. That was his style. So he's musing here about the unspeakable. So be patient with his journey here. And we can talk about this, Again, you have questions, raise your hand. It's the void that contradicts everything that is spoken before the words are said. The void that gets into the language of public and official declarations at the very moment they are pronounced and makes them ring dead with the hollowness of the abyss. Those are strong words. The hollowness of the abyss shouts back at me when I hear these words of the unspeakable thrown at me. Every day, in every way, things are going to get better and better, huh? Right. He goes on. No, it is the emptiness of the end. Ooh. He's looking at the void and the end of all things. And then he corrects his readers, he says. Not necessarily the end of the world, he says, but a theological point of no return. A climax of absolute finality and refusal. Okay? In equivocation. What's he saying? In disorder. In absurdity. This is Merton. He was talking about this encounter with the unspeakable in the words of official declarations. Are you getting my drift about why I got this quote here? Think about it. This is a serious moment here. We're in the face of the unspeakable. Be patient with it. Equivocation, disorder, absurdity, which, he says, can be broken open again to truth only by miracle, by the coming of God. So we're plowing forward, we're hearing all these things, coming at us. We can tell that there's no connection with, all we hear is the hollowness of the abyss and the void, right? And we're wondering, what are we going to do with all this? And yet, he says, now he's talking to his book, as if it's a person. It's a kind of a strange literary device he has here. Yet nowhere do you, that is the book he's written, this is the book, where is it here? See, my copy, it's worn. Raids on the Unspeakable by Thomas Merton. He's talking to that book, and the book talks back, as it were, in his own dialogue. He says, you seem to say that for you, this is precisely what it means to be a Christian. Huh? Yes, precisely what it means to be a Christian. For Christian hope begins where every other hope stands frozen in the face of the unspeakable. Christian hope begins where every hope stands frozen in the face of the unspeakable. Thomas Merton. Then I comment. Normal human hopes, hopes for health, money, and love, confront their demise in the unspeakable, where illness, poverty, and shame, and lovelessness conspire to choke off these hopes. The demise of these normal human hopes gives way to the miracle of Christian hope. This is true. It gives way to the miracle of Christian hope, which can actually begin, listen to this, Christian hope can actually begin in the fail place of human hopes. Christian hope can actually begin in the fail place of human hopes, according to Merton. And then the peasant had another line of thinking to warn me about the improper use of words. The peasant continued, but Gus, beware of the false language of eutrapelia. What the heck is eutrapelia? Well, that's a Greek word found in Scripture in the New Testament, which means frivolous jesting about immoral things. Our media is filled with this lewd and mocking jesting, which makes all life-giving and all life-giving activity into a joke. People fall into this vice because they want some relief from their trauma-filled lives. Yet before they know it, they're laughing all the way to hell. Eutrapelia is a trap for the soul. It weakens our ability to maintain our moral compass. Billy Joel in the song Only the Good Die Young was wrong when he said that laughing a bit too hard never hurt anyone. On the contrary, eutrapelia opens the soul to many deep wounds of sin. Of course, there's also joyful laughter and healthy humor, which are far different from the mocking and lewd spirit of eutrapelia. And then I continue. Our efforts at resolving our relational or political problems through dialogue are threatened by loss of faith in the joy caused by the coming of God. Never forget that. Don't let these forces rob you of your joy in the resurrection, in the birth, in the Christian story with a capital S. The lack of faith can devolve, of course, and this is found throughout Merton's thinking too. The lack of faith can devolve further into violence. And as people descend into cycles of violence, fear rules, and the law of the jungle replaces in short order the natural laws, the law of nations, or the law of love. The peasant of Notre Dame gazed upon me and said, "Speak of peace in the face of the unspeakable. Think of peace in the face of the unthinkable. And remember, you always have the choice to love." You always have the choice to love. That's very important. Because we teach this book. This is one of the key books of my profession. It's called the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's abbreviated CCC, right? In the books. And the important thing about this book, what is it? What is the goal of Christian doctrine? The goal of our teaching is love. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is not to pound your neighbor with morality. The goal is not to be a master of religion. The goal is love. The goal of our teaching is love. And that's really important. And it's here in the introduction to this book. I mean, they actually quote that. The goal of our doctrine is love. Now, I hope that stays. So, now, my friends, the second part of the talk. The reason you're here. It may be the title of the talk. We're going to look together. If I find my documents, here they are. Always looking for my documents. Could somebody help me hand these out? Hey, Karen. Steve.
Thank you.
This is an excerpt from the Catechism of the Catholic Church on safeguarding peace. It's under the section in the Catechism on the fifth commandment, you shall not kill. And we're going to look at the issue tonight of the just war. And this is, it starts, I would say, with setting the table for the explanation of the just war, which is on the second page. We've got 3 pages here. So the second page actually has the documents about, the statements about just war. We don't want to rush to that, because the problem is you've got to put this all into context. And the context in this section of the Catechism is really, look at 2302. This is the key thing. 2302 gets to the heart of the problem of war, interestingly enough. The Lord asked our Lord asked for peace of heart and denounced murderous anger and hatred as immoral. Okay. And you all know this. This is basic. Anger is a desire for revenge, to desire vengeance in order to do evil to someone who should be punished is illicit. It's praiseworthy to impose restitution on somebody or to correct their vice and maintain justice. Like we all do that, for example, when we're raising kids, right? That's okay. But if anger reaches the point of a deliberate desire to kill or seriously wound a neighbor, it's gravely against charity. It is a mortal sin. The Lord says, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment. That's in the Sermon on the Mount. Deliberate hatred is contrary to charity. Hatred of the neighbor is a sin when one deliberately wishes him evil. Hatred of the neighbor is a grave sin when one deliberately desires him grave harm. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons and daughters of your Father who is in heaven. First point. Do you notice something? There's a parallel here. Remember what happens when you remove the eucatastrophe from the catastrophe? You end up with sorrow and wrath. Well, the wrath, another name for wrath, is anger. And another approach to sorrow is certainly self-hatred projected onto others. Your own hatred projected onto others. That is, you see how this fits into sorrow and wrath? So God is saying to us, do you want to get rid of war? Start with the person in the mirror. Start with you. And look at your own heart. And see that often we project our own self-hatred onto others and call it hatred of others. And we often get so angry that we want revenge for the injustices very concretely done to us. Not denying that. Here's the first step of the catechism out of war. So when Father Barry was buried, when we had the Mass, he chose all the music. What was one of the songs? Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let it begin with me, opening up to the joy of the eucatastrophe. Then it goes on. Respect for and development of human life requires peace. It's obvious, right? Peace is not merely the absence of war. And again, this is true about family life, isn't it? You're laughing. And it's not limited to maintaining a balance of powers between adversaries. Peace cannot be attained on earth without safeguarding the goods of persons, free communication among men. That's what's sorely lacking right now. Is free communication with each other, I think. Respect for the dignity of persons. We're certainly failing that in lots of ways. And peoples. and the assiduous practice of fraternity, solidarity, brotherhood and sisterhood, I would add. Peace, according to St. Augustine, that's what this is from, is the tranquility of order. Peace is the work of justice and the effect of charity. You've got to have justice and love working together. If you have just love without justice, it becomes what the famous non-denominational preacher said was sloppy agape. Agape is the Greek word for the highest form of love. Sloppy agape. If you have just justice without love, well then, the way an African priest described that to me, justice without love, the surgeon is working and he's saving somebody's life, and all of a sudden, it's 5 o'clock. It's quitting time. Well, he's done his work. He walks out in the middle of the surgery. That would be justice without love. I like that. That was the best description of justice without love I ever heard. It's kind of funny, right? We know that no doctor worth his salt would do that. But he uses it as an example of justice without love. This is a good one. Okay? So, we don't want sloppy agape, and we don't want justice without love. Justice and love embrace. They work together. Okay? All right. And notice this idea of being the effect of love. Well, that's because God is love, and he works through his effects. Okay? So when we say peace is the effect of love, it means that God's love gives us peace. Peace is the gift of God's love. And we see that in the Gospels. Right? My peace I give you. Right? See, the effect of love, the effect of Jesus' love, right? Okay. And notice what comes up in 2305. Earthly peace is the image and fruit of the peace of Christ, the Messianic Prince of Peace. You will notice that when Pope Leo gave his most important statement about peace, he kept calling Jesus on Palm Sunday what? The King of Peace. He kept underlining it. Well, he's simply echoing this particular line in the Catechism. Earthly peace is the image and fruit of the peace of Christ, the Messianic Prince of Peace. By the blood of his cross in his own person, he killed the hostility. How do I get rid of that hostility? I take it to Jesus at the cross. That's how I kill it. I don't kill the hostility by spreading it around and pushing people and knocking them down because I'm so hostile. I take it to the Lord. I take it to his passion, death, resurrection. I take it to his paschal mystery. Because that's where he killed the hostility. I gotta kill that hostility or I'm in deep trouble, right? He reconciled men with God, and guess what he did with his church? He made his church the sacrament of the unity of the human race and its union with God. Quote, he is our peace. He has declared, blessed are the peacemakers. You see how it flows from Jesus right to the church without stopping at go, without collecting $200. Excuse my monopoly reference. It goes right from Jesus to the church. You see that? That's important. You see what's going on? The wisdom of this person that wrote this catechism. It was mostly written by Joseph Ratzinger before he was Pope, when he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. But you can see his accuracy here. It's just like, ooh. It's accurate. He is our peace. He has declared blessed. Those who renounce violence and bloodshed, and in order to safeguard human rights, make use of those means of defense available to the weakest, bear witness to evangelical charity, provided they do so without harming the rights and obligations of other people and societies. They bear legitimate witness to the gravity of the physical and moral risks of recourse to violence, with all its destruction and death. Okay, I was trying to think of an example of this, and I couldn't think of a better one than Archbishop Oscar Romero, who witnessed from his work as an archbishop in El Salvador when the country was wrought with civil strife, and he just kept humbly witnessing to peace, and he didn't abandon his place. And then they finally did kill him. And then his response to the possibility that they would kill him was, "Oh, if they kill me, I will rise again in the people of El Salvador." And then years later, he's named a saint. And it was true. But that's what I think that's what this section here is about. It's about people who make the choice to witness to peace, in the face of the unspeakable. That's what's going on there. Okay. Avoiding war. 2307. The fifth commandment forbids the intentional destruction of human life because of the evils and injustice that accompany all war. This is the church insistently urges everyone to prayer and to action so that divine goodness may free us from the ancient bondage of war. So when I think of divine goodness being poured out and freeing us, I naturally think of the upcoming feast, Pentecost. Okay? That's the outpouring of divine goodness promised by Jesus to the apostles. And we, at this point in history, need to be preparing for Pentecost by asking for God to pour out the divine goodness, yes, over everybody, especially the people who have irritated us the most in these troubled times. Okay? Everybody, every person. That's the divine goodness freeing us from the bondage of war. That's good news. That's worth rejoicing. All citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war, 2308, and now the pièce de résistance, the just war theory. Here it is. Wait a second, Gus. Are these together? This was stapled together. We're on to 2313. What?
2313, isn't it?
We jumped.
We did.
I apologize. This is, you guys got to rearrange the way these papers are. Here I went to all this trouble to get these papers right, and I didn't get them right. This is my journey. Okay. Just follow the numbers. Don't follow the way I set up the pages. I was so eager to show you the just war theory, and then I'm back to the third section, which we'll get to, but this is the just war theory here. Okay? However, as long as the danger of war persists, which it does in this world, and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense. This is the vocation of our military. Okay, that's what I would say. Lawful self-defense. It's fine. Governments, once all peace efforts have failed, we can rely on lawful self-defense. 2309. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force requires rigorous consideration, and here are the gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy at one and the same time. So what they're saying here, introducing the framework of a just war. And in order to have a response in defense, you have to have these four conditions, and they have to line up together. Okay? So this is quite a mountain to climb. Okay? First of all, if you're defending against an aggressor, this is the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. Okay? Number one, whatever your adversary is doing, it better be lasting, grave, and certain. It better threaten you that way. That's how I would put it. Right? Threaten you in a lasting, grave, and certain way. Threaten your country or threaten your community. Right? That's what we're looking at. The damage. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. Okay? So the question of you exhausted all possible other ways, other off-ramps, as the media has been talking about off-ramps a lot, right? You've exhausted all the possibilities of getting off this path to war. That's how I would, again, I'm translating it. You can translate it too, by the way. Remember, this is the principles of a framework, and you can put this in your own words and make it mean something to you. That's what I'm trying to do. There must be serious prospects of success. Okay, that's like military prudence. That's what I might call that, right? So the people in charge of the question of what to do in the face of an aggression, they make an assessment that whatever they're going to do in response, they have to believe very, very thoroughly that it has a prospect of success to deal with the problem. See? That's what the just war guidelines point to. And then the fourth one is the most difficult for modern warfare. Because of the rise, every time we have a war, if you think about civilian casualties, that's how I parse this last point. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Okay? Then the document goes on. These are the traditional elements enumerated, the four elements, in what is called the just war doctrine. Okay. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to who? It belongs to the prudential judgment of who? Of those who have responsibility for the common good. That means the leadership of the states in general. But if the leadership of the states they veer off on these 4 points, then the common good is going to be protected, at least the way I see it, by the wisdom of the church. Okay? So if the people who are responsible for the common good really egregiously mess up, then the responsibility of the common good is going to, at least the common moral good, is going to be located in the wisdom of the church and people of goodwill, anyone of goodwill. That thus you have like the most famous document that was ever written was John the 23rd in 1963 in response to the missile crisis. He wrote Pacem Terris. It's the last thing he wrote, so they call it his last will and testament. Pacem Terris, peace on earth. And the first person to read this outside the Vatican was Nikita Khrushchev. Okay? He sent it to Khrushchev, sent it to Kennedy, and he authored, through them both reading this document, a correspondence. Even before the document came out, he set up a correspondence secret between Kennedy and Khrushchev because he was so concerned about the destruction of the world. Now, I bring this up here because that's a good example of when the church stepped in. And at that time in history, thank God that Kennedy and Khrushchev both kind of listened to the old man. If I could put him there, because he was old when he was placed in the papacy, right? But they listened to him, and they did. They seriously listened to him because they were frightened. That was part of the reason they listened to him. Okay. But the point is, I'm using that as an example of what happens with the problem of the common good if the guardian, the normal guardians of the common good may not be up to doing their job. Well, then at least the moral burden is going to fall more to the church. I think that makes sense to me. That's from history. Okay? It doesn't mean that the church takes over the government of a country or something like that. It's not like, to use a local example, it's not like a pastor here of a Catholic who's got a job to do something for the common good of Mishawaka is going to call that person up and say, you have to do it this way. The church doesn't operate that way. But wise people who have concern for the common good are going to have a friendly relationship with their pastor. Which they do here in this city. I noticed that after 35 years of working here, that a lot of the people who help us with the common good of Mishawaka happen to go to church here, and they connect with their church leadership. So, but they don't. It's not like the church leadership calls them up and says, David Wood, this is what I want you to say exactly in your State of the City address. It doesn't work that way. But people do share wisdom. And the church has a concern for the common good, especially the moral common good. And the physical common good is definitely handled by the lay people, not by the leaders of the church. Okay? There's a very wise division of labor that way. Okay? I hope I made that clear. If that's not clear, we can talk about that. We get that even clearer. But that's the direction you got to place this in. Okay? All right. Public authorities, here's the raising of an army, 20-10. In this case, have the right and duty to impose on citizens the obligations necessary for national defense. Okay? This is just obvious. Those who are sworn to serve the country in the armed forces are, as I said before, they're servants of the security and freedom of nations. if they carry out their duty honorably, they truly contribute to the common good of the nation and the maintenance of peace. Thank you for your service. Public authorities should make equitable provision, however, for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. They owe some kind of service. They're obliged to serve some way the human community in some other way. So we have don't we have that famous story of the chaplain that didn't bear arms, that saved all those people? What is that, Hacksaw Ridge? Yeah. So, yeah, the chaplain never bore arms, but he served in some other way. In that case, in a very dramatic way, right within the army. But there's other things people could do who are called by conscience not to bear arms. And Vatican II shifted that and reminded countries that they needed to regard conscience in that regard too. Now it says, the church and human reason both assert the permanent validity of the moral law during armed conflict. Now, this is really, really important, because what often happens during war, we all know this from history, is that war over time grows more and more atrocious. It starts out slow, and then all of a sudden it ramps up, and it gets more and more atrocious on both sides. You can look at that, for example, World War II, right? At a certain point, they did start bombing civilian targets. Both sides. That's a good example. Okay, it got more and more atrocious. And so the church says, don't forget, guys and gals. This is how I would paraphrase it. Don't forget, the moral law is not suspended just because you're at war. You can't, it's not all's fair in war and love. We talked about the catastrophe of marriage before, but we're now to the catastrophe of war. Okay? But it's not that way. There's rules. And one of the most dramatic moments during World War II was in 1944, when a Jesuit named John Ford wrote an opinion about bombing civilian targets. And I thought it was actually a very courageous thing he did, because at that time we were bombing civilian targets in both, the United States, in both theaters, both the Pacific and in Europe. And he made it clear that that's intrinsically wrong. Okay? That's a good example of the church speaking with a moral voice and saying that something is wrong, even though everyone was ramping up to do it. And they were doing it. But it goes on record, and maybe people later on can learn from it, even if they don't learn from it at that moment. That's why I admire what John Ford did. There's a very famous case in the 1950s where one of the universities in England gave Truman an honorary doctorate, and a very famous philosopher, a Catholic philosopher, Elizabeth Anscombe, she said, I'm not going to that graduation, because what he did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was intrinsically wrong. And she caught a lot of hell for it. And it's just an interesting case, okay? But she stood her ground as a Catholic philosopher. And it became a very famous example of the same point, even though it was in retrospect. It's now the 1950s, the war is over. But that's an example of that whole principle. There it is. Then to go back, I'm sorry how this was pulled together, but then to go back to the rest of this document. Prisoners need to be treated treated humanely. Obviously, actions deliberately contrary to the law of nations and the universal principles are crimes. Notice the reference to the law of nations. So that's an external framework of law, like international law. Blind obedience does not suffice to excuse those who carry actions out that are against the law of nations. Thus, now the prohibition of genocide is here, right? The extermination of a people, nation, or ethnic minority must be condemned as a mortal sin, okay? One is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide. That is kind of, of course, that came out of the experience of World War II. Every act of war directed, and then the next point that was contributed, as I said, by John Ford in America in 1944. Every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a crime against God and man, which merits firm and unequivocal condemnation. That's a quote from Vatican II. Okay? That's highest church doctrine right there. Right? And then a discussion, a danger of modern warfare. It provides the opportunity to those who possess the scientific weapons, and A, B, and C, atomic, biological, or chemical, to commit those crimes. The accumulation of arms, then the problem of the arms race is mentioned. And that's been mentioned over and over again in church documents since Pius XII. Okay? And it says here, it strikes many as a paradoxically suitable way of deterring potential adversaries from war. They see it as the most effective means of ensuring peace among nations. This method of deterrence gives rise to strong moral reservations. The arms race does not ensure peace. Far from eliminating the causes of war, it risks aggravating them. Spending enormous sums to produce even new types of weapons impedes efforts to aid needy people. It thwarts the development of peoples. Over-armament multiplies reasons for conflict and increases the danger of escalation. So what you have, again, in this document, when he wrote this, Pacem in Terris, the big critique of a bunch of the moral theologians in America was that he was being unrealistic. Pope John the 23rd. Why was he being unrealistic? Because he claimed that an attitude of trust could enter into relationships between nations rather than just the attitude of fear. He accepted the fact that because of fear, we build up armaments. He knew that that was going on, but he really believed, and some of these other theologians really gave it to him and kind of made fun of him. They mocked him in a way, theologically politely, unlike some of the mockery of the Pope we've heard more recently is not so polite. But I won't go there. But the issue is that he was criticized by them, and who turned out to be right? He did. He did. That's history. They want to know, like, dramatically, one of the most dramatic things that happened. It's recounted in this book. Sorry, guys. James Douglas. He studied theology for a time at Notre Dame, and then he went on to different places. But he's 88 years old now. And he just finished his, probably what he considers to be his last book, is right there, Martyrs of the Unspeakable. So he's into this unspeakable idea. So he names this book JFK and the Unspeakable. Why do I have the book here? Because at the back of this book is JFK's famous American University address, which he gave a week after Pope John the 23rd died. He appears at the American University where they train diplomats, right? And he gives this incredible speech. And the speech actually mirrored the principles of Pachman Terrace, Peace on Earth, by John the 23rd. So that's that whole milieu where the church can provide the moral common good. Okay, so look at 23:17. It's kind of a summary of the moral struggle again that we talked about before. Injustice, excessive economic and social inequalities, envy, distrust, and pride raging among men and nations constantly threaten peace and cause wars. Everything done to overcome these disorders contributes to the building up of peace and avoiding war. Insofar as men are sinners, the threat of war hangs over them and will so continue till Christ comes again. But, it's very important, insofar as they can vanquish sin by coming together in charity, violence itself will be vanquished, and these words will be fulfilled. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The quote from Isaiah. And I want to point out that's a quote found at the base of the United Nations building. So we did have a bit of a debate earlier this year about why the Pope would not join the what was it called, the Gaza Peace Board or whatever it was called. Is that right? The Trump Peace Board?
Board of Peace.
Board of Peace, thank you. And the Pope explained through, I think he said it, but some of the other cardinals said it too, or in explanation, that the church sees the United Nations as the more appropriate venue for such a work. And when I remember when I was like 7 years old, we had a little portable black and white TV, and my grandfather was there, and he disrupted my dinner so he could turn that TV on right where we were eating in the kitchen, because it was portable, right? It's a new thing in those days, a little portable TV. And he has it on, and I said, Gramps, what are you doing? We're eating. He says, the Pope is talking to the United Nations, and I want to hear it. And it was Pope Paul VI addressing the UN. That's just a memory of mine. But the point there is, you can see the church wants to empower these other frameworks. The church doesn't try to do it all on its lonesome. It's going to do it with all people of goodwill. And there you have the thing. It's your turn. I'm sorry, I went on. I apologize. Do you have comments or questions or problems with what I've said? Do you feel a little better about the church's teaching on peace? I hope. Question? There's got to be a question.
I don't exactly know where to begin with questions because I thought of a lot of different things all the way through this talk here, and it kind of divides you in your mind because I can't absorb all of this stuff and put it over on the side here and remember to recall it.
Okay.
So
I apologize. I just got go in here. Is there?
I guess it kind of makes me, is it justifiable to, like, be trying to pass a bill for 1.3 or $4 trillion to enhance the war chest, I guess? I mean, is it really a smart move from a standpoint of for our own personal protection? I don't know.
Wow. I mean, I'm not. I'd love to be able to answer that, but that goes into the realm of the prudence of the military people who order the weapons, and the prudence of the people who produce the weapons, and the prudence of the government people that oversee the process. And I'm not any one of those three. I'm a religion teacher, Mishawaka.
Yeah, that makes sense for what you just said there.
It's those three groups
Right.
that have to, they should confront, we want them to confront these moral issues.
Well,
That's what we want.
We as human beings can't understand how to run a whole country and a world.
Right, that's exactly
We
right.
entrust our government to do
Right.
that.
Right. And so what the church does though is give us guidelines that would help.
Another question I had in my mind when they were talking, this war against Iran is, to my recollection, it's gotta be at least 50, 60 years old. They claimed that there were weapons of mass destruction in another country. Did Iran ever admit that they had them? Or were they asked ever, do you have them? And they said no, and it'd be something like Christ, you know, they walking over and saying, they want to know, or they're waiting for him to confirm that he's Jesus. You know what I mean? Did anybody ever confirm that?
Well, there's been debates within our own government about that. We had the resignation of Joe Kent, who was the head of counterterrorism. He said that Iran posed no threat to the United States in terms of that. And he said that the intelligence agencies in America had confirmed that to him, and that it was, according to him, and I think according to some other people who've looked at this, it was more like Israel answered it in a different way. And my understanding of this story, I could be wrong, I don't know for sure, but we're living in the fog of war. So it's hard to sort out these truths from the media. But from what I can tell, according to what Marco Rubio said, that it was Israel's decision to go into Iran, and the Americans followed Israel into that. And it sounded like our executive, President Trump, listened to Netanyahu rather than his own intelligence. That's what I heard.
It does seem that way too.
I don't know, and I'm not in the news business.
Well, we're not, none of us are,
Okay,
have the right to, or know what's going on at that level.
we don't, but we hear different witnesses that we think might be
Credible.
the most credible. That when we look at these things, that we do have some really good, credible witnesses in the alternative media. By the way, I think, and I would pay attention to them because they're the ones that are further away from power, and often you get a different look at things from people who are witnessing to the situation further away from power. The most important, think about the media. I saw this graph one time. It was very helpful to me. You got left, you got right on one axis, left to right. So you have, your news sources that are very strong, left wing, news sources that are very strong, right wing. And then another axis is whether those sources are close to power or far away from power. That's the other axis. And it's the case that you can often check the sources close to power by evaluating the ones that are further away from power, and then compare the two for yourself. I had one experience of doing that years ago when I was doing research on peace, and I discovered this man. Who is he? He's the general's son. His father was Madi Peled in Israel. He was in charge of logistics. He was one of the 5 generals that ran the Israeli defeat of their neighbors in the 67 war. And it's an amazing story. Madi Peled met with the Israeli after the war. He met with 2 groups. He met with the generals, and then he met with the Israeli cabinet. And he said this to them. He said, now's your chance. Negotiate a deal with the Palestinians. This is the time. You won the war, do it now. And then he made a prophecy. Not a biblical prophecy, but a projection. He's a logistics guy. He knew how to project the use of things. He said, if you don't, what's going to happen is the army, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, will become an army of permanent occupation, and you will demoralize the army. They didn't listen to him. He retired a year later, and he became an Arab scholar and a peace activist. And then his son, trying to get as far away from the whole thing as he could, became a karate expert. And he ended up running 2 dojos in San Diego. Very, very successful karate guy. The karate general's son. And then a tragedy struck. His niece was killed in a Jerusalem mall by Palestinian suicide bombers. And he goes back to Israel, and his sister greets him, who lost her daughter. And in the face of this is a prominent Zionist family. So they wanted to take that example of that girl that was killed and argue for revenge. And she said no. She said, no one should use my suffering as a mother as a reason to take revenge, because no mother would want any other mother to suffer as I'm suffering. No mother would want that. So she turned down the efforts of some of the people in Israel to use her suffering that way. This blew Mikko's mind, and he started a search, and he became a peace activist. He gave up his karate business, and I discovered him on the internet, and long and short of it, I dragged Mikko up to Green Bay. We did a peace conference up there, and then Mikko joined us in the Holy Land for our Pilgrimage of Mercy in 2016. So Mikko's a friend of mine, and there's one more, just a humorous story. We're walking in the old city of Jerusalem, me and Mikko, and he finally gets up the guts to ask a question. He says, Gus, is it something about your religion that you are so out of shape? And I said, Mikko, nothing to do with my religion. It's simple human weakness. He loved it. Okay, so too much anything else, questions. See, the reason I tell that story is that people can shift consciousness about war. His father did, and then he did later on. And it's a great story, The General's Son. It's worth reading. Of course, I found working with Nico to be a great joy, because he's taught me a lot about the truth of the situation there.
So how,
Go ahead.
I don't want to take, any side, but how can we expect the Israelis to answer the October 7th? Is that
Yeah.
I have the date right? And I didn't hear any mention of maybe what would be considered preemptive steps. And I think that's one of the arguments to the Iran situation,
Right.
that we were taking preemptive steps
Right. Well,
to
I'd say
prevent a
that,
larger catastrophe.
Right.
The common good. What's the common good for the most people or for all people?
well,
Can you have that for the common good of all people?
yeah, you sure can. And the church really believes that you can. You have the common good of all people.
Well, they believe it, but how about the adversaries, the evil ones?
Which are evil ones?
I don't know, maybe the governments who are more dedicated to their own power than their own people, that don't mind
Mm-hmm.
putting their citizens ringing around
Mm-hmm.
facilities,
Well,
power generating facilities, or so that if they become fodder, it just increases their
mm-hmm.
sense of their own righteousness.
Okay. Well, all those prudential choices are conditioned by historical factors that go in all kinds of directions. And so you have to look at at what gives rise to these things. One thing I would really recommend against is setting a certain date as the precondition for how you're going to look at everything, because there's always a build-up to that date, and there's always factors. So for example, when we're
Well,
looking,
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That date. I mean, you could justify their actions, and they've tried to justify their actions by that date, that event.
well,
But it's not like there weren't lead-ups to that.
right,
There weren't the same kind of issues beforehand.
right,
And
and then
continue.
continue, right. Well, at that point, you have to go with, you have to kind of apply the framework of the church teaching to what's going on in any given moment and do the best you can. I don't know that you can make a full judgment. That's the you can't come to complete certainty in a fog of war. But what you can do is kind of, as far as I can tell, is you've got to follow the best light of your conscience and approach it that way and open to the truth, and it opens up light. God does not disappoint. That's how I would urge people to approach this, rather than to close off possibilities. Think of all the possibilities and try to test them. That's probably a good way to start. That's how I might, And what happened with Mikko is that he started testing, he passed over. He started testing the possibilities by walking in the moccasins of his adversaries and discovering their story so he could merge it with the story that he knew from his Zionist background. And I think that that is the way to peace. Okay? You do the best you can. You don't, you recognize that a person is not all summarized by just their standpoints on certain things. That there are infinite possibilities of light and truth and mystery and freedom in everybody. And so what you do is you pass over to the standpoint, you learn from it, and you come back to yourself and make your own moral assessment. You've got to come back to yourself. You can't take on you can't take on their journey. You got to walk your own journey. But you enrich your journey by, like Mikko did, by passing over to the other and then coming back to yourself. I think that's at least a way. It's hard. It's very hard. It's full of anguish. You read Mikko's story, it's full of anguish. But you go back to the church teaching, the joy and hope and the anguish and the sorrow of the people of our world are the joy and hope and the anguish and the sorrow of the followers of Christ. Nothing that is authentically human fails to find an echo in our hearts. That's the opening line of joy and hope. Document Gaudium et Spes, the Catholic Church. With that, any questions, problems? Does that help a little bit? I hope.
One thing with the current
Yeah.
conflict is I have not seen or heard anything, through the media that that these conditions were, to quote, the catechism, that the damage is, must be lasting, great, and certain. I don't know what the immediate threat was, because nobody has given evidence that I would understand, or that, the next point, all other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. So I just haven't, and perhaps this exists, but I don't feel like it's been disseminated.
Okay.
I think that's my struggle with this, is that I don't understand. I mean, at least when we invaded Iraq and I had to say goodbye to my son, who was an Army Ranger, because they were going to be deployed the very next day and marching into Baghdad, that we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction. Turns out that was probably inaccurate, but at least we were told that that's why my son was telling me that, if he ever comes back, what he wanted me to tell my grandson about him, and so that I could support him and be able to be strong for him. But right now, I'm not feeling this, and I'm not seeing it, and I'm grateful that my husband, he's retired from the Air Force now, and my son is, in civilian life, but I worry about all the other mothers, both sides.
Well, sure. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your family's service.
What did your son come out of that with? What kind of a feeling? Did he feel that there were absolutely weapons of mass destruction? Or what?
He doesn't talk much about
Yeah,
that.
I understand.
He did say, he was Army, he did say, don't listen to what the Marines say, but that's all he told me. So, I find that, they talk amongst themselves, but they don't tell mommy what.
What did you say? Don't listen to the media?
The Marines, the
Oh, the
Marines.
Marines. Well, my one son was in the Marines, but it was peacetime.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Good, thank you.
Gus, I'd make a comment, I look at our current situation,
Yeah,
and we're dealing with a country that has been a rogue nation for decades. And it's a country that has supported terrorists across the Middle East. And it's a country that we lost 243 servicemen in Lebanon, in Beirut, in 1983.
I remember.
And what we've seen most recently is in January. We saw 40,000 of their own country slaughtered by the administration because they were protesting. They wanted to change, and they killed 40,000 people.
Okay.
And we've seen that country fire missiles at Israel, and they've done that time and time again. And you've got an administration that they went to war against Israel, and they also fired missiles at 9 or 10 countries around them, smaller countries. And that kind of administration, if we did nothing,
Right,
and we, the other nations, the peaceful nations of the world, watch them build nuclear weapons, I think that regime was so irrational
uh-huh,
that they would probably use those weapons against their neighbors, and there's no immediate threat, and it would be 3 or 4 years, but there was an estimate that they would be able to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the United States.
uh-huh.
And, were we right or were we wrong? Who knows? But, it's a scary situation.
Was it very frightening? I'm also, I'm frightened too. I'm frightened because the lack of any sort of negotiation, and negotiations being broken off, and war being advanced in the middle of negotiations, raises a problem there too. So I'm frightened on that side too. Very frightened. That's why I put on this one. I got it. I know it's a scary situation. We live in the question is, for me, it would be who should guide the prudence of the United States? That'd be the question. And I think, I'm not so sure that that particular faction that runs Israel has the United States' best moral interests in mind. So that would be the other side. That's the other side of the picture. And
It's not up to them to decide the best
Up to who?
interest, the moral. the people you just talked about, the Israeli government, right?
No, I think
You
that,
don't think they have the best interests of the United States? That's not their job to have the best interests.
I agree with that. They don't. That's the
They have
point.
the best interests of their own.
That's it. So the point is that do we allow another country to determine our interests? That's the other question. That's the question that comes to the other side of what's been raised.
Yeah, is that,
I'm just saying,
is the place that America, the United States holds in the world,
well,
call on us to intervene more than
That's-
Israel intervening in
that-
our affairs?
that's the question that that has racked this country back and forth throughout periods of the 20th century, and apparently it's going to rack through this country again.
Yeah.
I say that with all due charity to everyone who holds any position.
Well, a country that's supposed to be government of the people, by the people, for the people, I think the majority of them are asking, why are we over there in Iran?
Right.
You know, I mean, that's not avoiding war. Certainly. I get it. We went over there to back up Israel. But there again is exactly what you guys were just talking about. Are we allowing Israel to get us into a war? Are we, the majority of the people in the United States really don't want anything to do with it?
That's the difficult issue right now, and we have different views on it, don't we? And I expected
Well-
the different views to come out
Well,
tonight.
you could say that we got provoked into this too. I suppose you could say that we got provoked. Israel got provoked into it by 2000 and whatever it was, October 7th. You know, they had all they wanted done, you know, so they retaliated. And they more than got even, in my opinion. But it didn't stop there, because it went to the next country and the next country.
Right.
So, I don't know, and now we're in it. And
Right, and the question is, what do we do to ramp it down? According to the Pope, we ought to go back to negotiating, and that is what we hope, rather than using arms.
there's
Yeah,
a
Gus,
difference.
tell me about the negotiation. You cannot trust one word out of their wicked mouth. You can't trust the name they put on the document. There is no way negotiations are gonna come to a head with someone that is correct on one side peacefully, and the other side wants Armageddon. It doesn't make sense. You can't negotiate with people like that. The government is the church over there, and the church is the government. Oligarchs run those countries. There's no, you can't, who are you gonna negotiate, the oligarchs?
Well,
Russia's run by oligarchs. But you can't negotiate with people like that. I wish you could. I wish you'd sign the paper and say, I'm not gonna enhance uranium to blow up the rest of the world.
Okay, that is a position a lot of my friends have, including some friends who left the church over it. And I'm trying to ask them to reconsider our prudential approach to this. But I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer to that. I have friends who've traveled extensively in Iran, and they don't see the country quite the way others do. I'll say it that way. I've discussed it with them, and it seems that there's a history there too, a history of misunderstanding that goes back to when 1953, when they elected someone democratically, and we, with the British, kicked him out and put in an oppressive regime, the Shah. Actually, they repaired the Shah's airplane in Appleton, my hometown, at KC Aviation. I was in high school, and I was invited by people who knew the avionics there to go look at the Shah's airplane. And guess what? I brought one of my teachers, and we got to see the Shah of Iran's airplane with the gold on the seat belt covers and the gold in the fixtures. It was really amazing. It's a beautiful airplane. But the thing is, we supported the Shah, and the people got very, very tired of him. And then they overthrew him in 1978, 79, and that's called the Islamic Revolution. So there's a history to what we did, and then what they did, and then it goes back and forth, tit for tat. And so you gotta, I would say, evaluate the history while you're assessing the conditions of the Iranian people. I was on both sides. I was part of the group that was repairing the oppressive Shah's airplane. They were pumping that money into Appleton. It was good. It was good life up there. Let me tell you. I mean, I'm joking, but you know, it was good life. But what I'm saying is that there's a history having to do with these things that we want to hear out the tragedies of history that were caused by us too. That, I think, is where the negotiation could begin. It's like a divorce. Some divorces don't work out, and some do.
Why are we fighting over oil?
Because it's, Rush Limbaugh used to say,
I mean,
oil is the power of, what did he say? The power of democracy is made through oil. I mean, not that, forgive me for quoting him, it might offend some of you, but I just point that out. Oil is a very important component of modern life.
Well, we could do wind, and we could do all these other things too.
Well,
They seem to, you know.
but yeah, I know.
If we spent the money that direction.
Instead of on arms.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gus.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.